is John Paul Miller, Chris Watts 2.0. 30-year-old Mica Miller was found about an hour away from her house with a fatal wound to her head. But where this gets really interesting is that Mica had filed for divorce and had served JP with papers about 48 hours prior and had also requested a restraining order. There's evidence that keeps piling up that Mica was in fear for her life. Something else was going on here that led to Mica's tragic death. I have receipts, screenshots, paperwork, filings, court records. I have so much stuff to go through, so I really just want to get into it and show you everything that I've been able to find so far. And of course, everything is alleged and it's all speculation at this point and circumstantial. I just want to say I'm not an official journalist. I'm not a mental health professional. I do have a lot of experience with cults because I was raised in one and I accidentally got married back into one. So my experience comes with that and being in a very high control, high demand situation, just like Mica, and being married to an abusive man, just like JP. The first big update is that the Robeson County Medical Examiner announced a few minutes ago that Mica Miller's death has officially been ruled as a self-inflicted wound to the head, but I don't think this is over. I've also learned that John Paul Miller has been released from his position within the church for a time of healing. There's also been multiple women come forward in the past 12 hours talking about their experiences with JP and the alleged crimes that he committed against them when they were minors. The first thing I thought was interesting is that Mica was found across state lines, and that immediately raised a red flag for me because I've just been in this space for so long. I know how frequently perpetrators and criminals do that, going across county lines or state lines, trying to confuse authorities or make the investigation much harder to accomplish. According to her friends and family, she had no reason to be there. There was no ties to that area, so why would she go there in the first place? The second red flag for me was, of course, the video of JP in front of the church. That whole video is just a mountain of red flags.
We're not going to do an altar call today. Instead, I'm going to have you stand up and I'm going to make an announcement. And after the announcement, I'm going to ask that you leave church quietly and don't talk about the announcement here in the building, please, if you can, so y'all can stand to your feet. Before I make the announcement, I also want to say that my request to you is that you will continue to come to church and serve and give for the next little bit, because I'm taking a little bit of a break and I don't want to have to worry about the church. My break may be a few days, a few weeks, I don't know. I got a call late last night. My wife has passed away. Yeah, it was self-induced, and it was up in North Carolina. And we're going to have a funeral for her next Sunday here at 3 p.m. And so it's all I can, I'm just kind of going on adrenaline right now. So y'all pray for me and my kids and everybody. And y'all knew that she wasn't well mentally, and that she needed her medicine that was hard to get to her. And so I'm sure there'll be more details to come. But just keep our family in your prayers, and I'm going to let Pastor Randall, a bishop, he can pray.
The fact that he doesn't want the congregation to talk about it, he wants them to leave immediately and not discuss it further. The fact that he has a Freudian slip and says self-induced instead of self-inflicted, and then goes on to discredit her and make this big show about her mental health struggles. If you go back and look at a lot of other videos of his sermons, he does this very frequently. I think it's a common pattern among narcissistic, abusive people is building the trail, like leading people to the eventual outcome of an apparent suicide, is laying the foundation of all of this mental health struggles and issues and her not taking her medication. Things like this are calculated and drawn out. So I am looking at some statements from John Paul's previous sermons where, again, he kind of drags Mica, or he's laying this foundation and really discrediting women as a whole, but especially Mica. It's very specific. Hindsight is 20/20, but looking back now, it's all very specific to her and how he wanted to gaslight her and his entire congregation and really paint this picture of an unstable, unwell person. But there's all of this really deeply layered abuse that's happening behind the scenes. But of course, he has this big persona that he's a man of God, and he's so full of himself. It's absolutely disgusting. It's revolting. It makes me nauseous. Then on March 10th, there's video footage of him preaching the sermon where he straight up tells people that he went through Mica's phone for the previous 2 years of text messages, and then revealed that he found 18 people who were reaching out to her saying, if you ever want to talk about your husband, you can talk to me and I'll keep it confidential. And then John Paul goes on to say that that's a demon talking in reference to these people reaching out to Mica and wanting to help Mica out of a clearly abusive situation. And then also in that same sermon, he tells the congregation that when his wife was in the hospital, as soon as she got out, she left him. And this is in quotes. She gets out and just leaves. She completely leaves me, leaves everything, drains the bank account, and just goes. Guess what? When you're talking bad about me out there, I'm building a school in Africa for over 100 kids to be able to be fed. So like every piece of this every sermon that I've listened to of his is always personal stories. It always comes back to make himself look good. He has this giant, grandiose, self-inflated sense of ego, and it just comes through in literally every single sermon that I've watched of his. He tells a story of a quote-unquote pastor who had someone follow their wife, but we find out now that he actually hired someone to trail Mica. He hired a private investigator to follow Mica and trail her. But this is what he says in the sermon. So he says the pastor had to hire a third-party company to find someone's wife who left him, and then once he found her, divorce papers were drawn up, but the gentleman who was drawing up the papers couldn't sign it because the Bible said that divorce is wrong. So he posts that video on the 17th, and then between the 18th and the 22nd, Mica posts a couple different videos speaking to abuse, all kinds of abuse in a relationship, and how, yes, God and the Bible says not to divorce, but what do they say about abuse, being physically and mentally abused? And then she gives a very specific example of abuse related to being forced to take illegal drugs. Just listen.
I've had a lot of women that have reached out to me about situations of abuse, and I just want to tell you what a lot of people have told me lately and reminded me, because I think I forgot. I knew, but I pushed it in the back of my head just because of my situation. But you are the bride of Christ. Before anybody else's bride, male or female, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what gender you are. Abuse is abuse. And you are the bride of Christ. And my Bible says that he took all the abuse you could think of for you so that you didn't have to live that life of slavery and bondage and pain. Jesus took it all for you. So you don't have to stay in a abusive relationship, whether that's sexual, whether that's somebody forcing you to take illegal drugs, or alcohol abuse, or physical abuse, psychological abuse, making you think that this is all your fault, or you're a bad mom, or you're a bad wife, or you're a bad husband, or you're not giving it your all when you know you are. God hates divorce, but why? According to everybody I've asked and the scriptures that I've found, it's because it hurts people. But does abuse hurt people? How do you think God feels about that? So, I want to remind you, like a bunch of people have been reminding me lately, that I'm God's bride first. And even an earthly spouse, who's a good spouse, when they know that their bride is being hurt, just imagine what an earthly spouse does. What do you think your heavenly spouse does? When you're the bride of Christ and he sees his bride going through abuse and hurt, what do you think he thinks about that?
Back on February 4th, John Paul preached a sermon about how it's wrong to rise up against religious leaders. Again, just putting himself on a pedestal and showing people that they have absolutely no bounds to go against him, to question him. Certainly not his wife, his God-given possession, as men like this see it, further solidifying how patriarchal and how abusive he is as a person. And that's just what he's comfortable showing the public, so we can only imagine what is happening behind closed doors. And apparently Mica was building all of this evidence and saving all of this evidence against him to use during their divorce. But of course, we find out now through Sierra, which is Mica's sister, when Mica was admitted to the hospital, or rather JP had her admitted to a mental health institute, he destroyed all of this evidence. He logged into her iCloud, to all of her social medias, anything where he could send a text, and cleared out everything. And then apparently, allegedly, sent text, like a mass text to everyone saying that she had a change of heart and her husband wanted to take her back. And so she was leaving the next day to go back to him, because at this time, she had moved out when was attending a completely different church. I believe she had moved out of state even at that point. So I think it's fair to say that she was not brought back willingly. Again, it's speculation, but the evidence is not looking like she wanted to be there. She was really looking forward to her life outside of JP. We've seen screenshots of text messages that she sent to her friends and family, excited to be, out of that situation, really looking forward to the future. So again, it just doesn't fit the narrative of something that would be self-inflicted, which that's not always the case. There are people who have unalived themselves that had spoken of future plans. So we don't know anything for sure, but the amount of circumstantial evidence is just continually mounting up. So in the past 24 hours, Sierra Francis, who's Mica's sister, and then one of their brothers, Nathan Francis, filed separate affidavits petitioning the courts for Mica's part of the estate. Since she was still legally married to JP, he currently has, control over all of the assets and marital estate associated with that. Apparently, in some of this information, we also find out that John Paul had sold his home to the church recently when Mica first filed for divorce, I believe back in November of 2023. That was the first time she filed, and then that was withdrawn. So he was clearly already moving his assets. He also apparently owned a bar. So the bar that he had partial ownership in was in Myrtle Beach, and it was called Crocodile Rocks. He apparently transferred his piece of that to his son. According to the affidavit, Mica had also been gathering all of this evidence to support her claims of abuse. This part's really upsetting. According to this affidavit, she told Sierra multiple times, quote, "If I end up with a bullet in my head, it was not by me, it was JP." The affidavit also states that they were unable to find all of the documentation that Mica had prepared. In fact, the only thing that they were able to find via JP was documentation saying that he had power of attorney, which I've heard online from various sources, but not confirmed that could potentially be forged because she had not given him power of attorney. There's just a lot of shit here. Mica had also filed several police reports over the previous weeks having to do with her tires being slashed, being followed, and tracking devices found on her vehicle. So this was really interesting to me when I was reading through here. She heard a pop and got out and saw that her tire was flat and that there was a razor still sticking in her tire, so somebody had clearly slashed her tire. So she makes a police report and then goes to a shop to have her tire fixed or tire replaced. And at that time, she's speaking to the officer, making the report while at the shop, and the name's been redacted, but apparently whoever was following her and harassing her was driving by at the same time the officer was there talking to Mica. And so she was able to point them out and be like, yeah, that's who's doing it. In the document, it refers to a he, and then at another point it refers to a her. So I'm not sure if there were multiple people following her or if that was a typo. The mechanics found a tracking device on her vehicle, and so she was able to call the police officer to come back and retrieve that tracking device. So it's crazy that all of this is like going down, happening in real time in front of the officers. In Nathan's affidavit, he also says that he received forwarded emails from Mica that were originally sent to Mica from JP. In the email, JP apologizes to Mica for slashing the tires and causing damage to her vehicle. So he outright says it was him. JP stated this to Mica, that he was angry when she confided or put her family before him, and that made him want to hurt her. Rather than forgive, he just wants to attack and try to cause pain. Like, that is deeply, deeply concerning. But he also has a history of this. In fact, let's look at all of the charges he had from his previous marriage. He was previously married to a woman. I'm not going to name her because I'm happy she got out and she's safe, but I know that she went through some pretty severe things. But he had 5 children with his first wife, and from that marriage, we know that there were a lot of charges that he pled guilty to. So we know there was 2 counts of knowingly damaging property, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, possession of liquor by a minor, possession of consumed liquor by a minor, possession of cannabis, and that was the same night as the liquor with the minors, contributing to the delinquency of a child, domestic battery, bodily harm, domestic battery, physical contact, assault, and a battery of a high and aggravated nature, 2 counts of that, and being on a premise after warning or refusing to leave. So all of this, again, is just repetitive of what he was doing to Mica as far as wanting to hurt her and not leaving or being somewhere he's not wanted, harassing, following, etc., etc. So he already has a history and a clear demonstration of what he's capable of with his previous wife. I went onto the Horry County record to look at all of his charges that were listed on there. This man has so many charges, from like so many traffic violations. I don't know how he has a license, but there's clearly something going on. Like, I've never known anyone. I counted up 37 charges listed on that one page for charges against him, and the majority of them had been dismissed. How after that many charges for traffic violations alone, and this man still has a license, and they continue to be dismissed? Like, why? And I think we know why, because people in positions of power continue to get away with this stuff because of their position, because of their money, because of their influence in the community, or their family's influence in the community. But another thing that really red flagged for me from the jump was when Mica was 14 years old. Apparently she lived in Myrtle Beach and started attending the youth group where JP was the youth group pastor, and she was 14. So he was 28, she was 14. That's how they met. Even in her obituary, which JP allegedly wrote, it says in there that they met when she would have been 14 or 15 and became friends at that time. So why is a 28, 29-year-old man being friends with a 14, 15-year-old? It wasn't friends because he was grooming her, because he ended up marrying her and cheating on his wife with her, apparently. So they ended up getting married when Mica was 23 and JP was 37. And of course, he's had this Solid Rock church and been the pastor for there. But if you read reviews and all of these stories online and these accounts, he's ran a lot of people off because of his behavior. He's abusive to people in all kinds of ways: financially, verbally, mentally, emotionally, clearly spiritually. And we know whoever's on the receiving end of that at home, whether it's his previous wife or Mica, they're going to receive the majority of that anger and that hatred and that disgusting parts of his person that he is. Back to the affidavit that Sierra and Nathan filed on behalf of Mica. 3 days ago, on May 3rd, the affidavit was filed by attorney Jared Bruchette in the Horry County Probate Court. So in the affidavit, it lists that the special administrator request was for a couple different reasons. One was to preserve Mica's portion of the marital estate, to obtain the confidential records from all of her medical records from the mental health place, and then medical centers, and victims advocacy, which is interesting. So I guess she had also had contact with a victims advocacy, and then to take possession and gain access to any wills, deeds, cemetery plots, insurance policies, or other estates in the descendant or the deceased safe deposit box. And then according to that document, to support the request, the timing of Mica's death is very suspicious, right? Because she just filed for the divorce, or had served him with papers 48 hours prior, and had requested the restraining order. So like I said, prior to her death is when Mica had officially filed for divorce from her husband, and then he was served with papers on the 25th. And supposedly he was completely shocked by the fact that he was served with papers, so this was kind of out of the blue for him. I guess he thought she wouldn't actually do anything about it because she had filed before and then ended up dropping it, I'm sure due to his threats, due to his blackmail, etc., etc. But she filed again, and this time actually served him with papers instead of just filing it with the court system, because there's a difference between the two. He talked about her mental health struggles very publicly and openly and often in his sermons, and even stated that if she tried to leave him, he would have her committed, which he actually did do. There's also mentions online from various sources. Supposedly there was all of this emotional and sexual abuse at home as well. According to some of the statements that have been sent by friends and people close to Mica, he apparently would make her watch him have sex with other people, and there's rumors that he even had a blow-up doll that was a child and do things in front of animals. Again, speculation. It's just a lot of rumors. A lot of things are flying right now, but none of it's positive. Even stuff you can find from before all of this went down. People have not had a good experience with this man, and today in the last hour I've seen a couple different women come forward telling their experiences of being underage girls and being sexually assaulted and raped by JP on church property when they were young. But this church and a lot of churches protect perpetrators and abusers and pastors who have a history of this. They look the other way, or, you know, Christ forgives, so we forgives, all of that bullshit. But there's also someone else that's been on the board of Solid Rock Church with JP who is a registered sex offender. Bernard Wilson Kennerson is on staff at the church. So it says, like, it shows a picture of him right on their website. So the church website has now been taken down, but you know, your girl has screenshots anyway from before then. So, but yeah, it says that he, like, it shows his picture, and I'll share it on the screen, but he's married. It goes on to give his credentials and where he received his Bible training. And then, yeah, there's a picture of him and John Paul and the other pastor, Matt Johnson, in front of the church, all looking like a bunch of pedophiles. But there's also the screenshot of his sex offender registry, and so he's registered in South Carolina for those crimes. And then JP's dad is Reginald Wayne Miller, but he goes by Wayne. And this man, there's so much shit with this man. It's messy. So he also lives in Myrtle Beach, and in the 90s he was arrested for hooking up with a minor in the shower for molestation charges, but then had the charges expunged from his record. So he also has done some really freaking sketchy things, and you can find all of these court documents and newspaper articles about this, and I can share some of those as well. But he apparently forced some J1 visa students who paid to travel to the US to attend his Bible college, because yes, this man has a Bible college. Didn't even pay them minimum wage. He would pay them, I think it was like $25 a week, and made them work all of the time, and didn't come through with any of the classes or the education that he promised. He failed to provide them with adequate food, shelter, and more, and he actually had federal charges from ICE for abusing the immigrant students while they were under his care here in the States. And then he also spent a lot of time in Pakistan, this guy, at a place called Eden Gardens, which was a place full of younger boys, and he already has charges for molestation. So people aren't doing their background checks, or they don't care. So they started, he worked with this guy named Jerry Seville, who started the church in Pakistan that Wayne was associated with. Well, this guy, Jerry, also had a suspicious death that happened I think 10 days before Mica's death, actually. So there's no clear cause of death, but that's just something to tuck into the back of your mind. Now, there's talk that Jerry Seville, I believe, didn't know all of the things that Wayne was doing, but it kind of makes me think maybe he found out. Maybe he knew too much. Maybe Mica knew too much. And yeah, so while he was in Pakistan, this man, he loves Wayne. He loves to blame other people and try to create a false narrative Shocking, right? Shocking. Because I have two examples of that. So the first one was when he was in Pakistan. He had made plans, allegedly, to falsely accuse the Pakistan court system. They had found that he was engaging in homosexual acts, which of course in Pakistan, being homosexual is very, very illegal. We don't know the allegations he planned to falsely make, but we do know that the Pakistani government was planning on exposing his homosexual relationships, but those allegations he planned to make against the Pakistani court were proven to be false, like this past October, so very recently. Now then, there's another guy in the picture named Troy, and Troy and Wayne are buddies. So when Wayne was coming back to America from Pakistan, he had his male lover come with him. He had his male lover's sister come as well, under the assumption that she was going to marry Troy. So that was kind of like their way to get his lover and his lover's sister over here. And so, yeah, so the sponsor to marry his partner's sister was this Troy guy. And of course, Troy was also a former pastor in Myrtle Beach. Shocking. So his name is actually Robert Troy Taylor. And according to an article in 2003, he faced charges of child molestation and then ended up turning himself into authorities. The charges were reportedly connected to 12-year-old boys from over a decade ago. So I guess these pedos of a feather really do flock together because we have Troy and Wayne and JP, and there's more. So there's also all of these rumors about JP having a mistress or girlfriend, right? That came out pretty quickly because only a couple days after Mica had passed away, JP was seen out in public with this woman named Suzy Skinner, and they have a long history. Let's go back because in 2021, we find out that Suzy's husband passed away. He was actually a quadriplegic. It's hard for me to say that word. He was in an accident like decades before, in a drunk driving accident, and was left in a wheelchair, but he went on to do some really awesome things. He was a public speaker. He seemed to be like living a wonderful life and making a great impact in the world. But apparently on Labor Day weekend, or Labor Day in 2021, he drowned in a community pool in his wheelchair. And I just thought, that just doesn't sit right with me. I mean, accidents do happen. It was not ruled a suicide. It was ruled an accidental death. But this man has been in a wheelchair for 20 plus years. He knows how close to get to the edge of a pool. Apparently no one else was there. Suspicious. According to Suzy, they spent a lot of time at this particular pool and they were always together, but she apparently wasn't there that day on a holiday. No one else was there, and he just happened to get too close to the edge and his wheelchair fell in and he drowned. Not liking that. That did, like, something's going on there. Something, I don't know. Speculation, but yeah, so I don't know if that's the truth or if there's more to that story, but it's just super interesting to know. So after he passes away, guess who preaches at his funeral? Of course, it's JP, and he said some really weird things, and I'll try to throw the clip up here for you guys to see just a couple seconds of it, but I don't know why you would feel comfortable saying this at anyone's funeral.
It's very, very exciting. I was Chris's pastor, to preach a funeral in which I don't have to lie. It's probably my first funeral where I get to say all the truthful stuff. And that's because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Chris was a child of God, is a child of God, faithful husband, wonderful father, great friend, brother.
This guy just rubs me the wrong way. He's so gross. According to online sources, JP and Suzy have been super weirdly close for a long time. So like I mentioned a minute ago, a couple days after Mica passed away, Suzy and JP were seen in public together at this restaurant. Why they're sitting on the same side of the table, I don't know. I don't sit on the same side of the table as my platonic friends of the opposite sex whose spouse has just passed away. It's just very strange. They're laughing, they're flirting. It looks like they're flirting. He's still wearing his wedding ring. According to online sources, they've been dating since 2021. They've been really close. Some of the specific examples said that they've been sharing food and blankets at soccer games and have been seen at the water parks together. Inappropriate behavior for a married pastor, whether he's separated from his wife or not, which we know just happened, and this stuff has been going on since 2021. You know what? I forgot one thing about Wayne Miller, JP's dad. So I came across this article where he was in this, I think they call it a bathhouse, like at the beach where you can go to change and shower and stuff. And he apparently walked up behind this guy at a urinal, pants down, nothing on but a t-shirt, and tried to look over at the guy's man bits. The guy ended up being an undercover detective. Yeah, so he arrested Wayne on the spot, and that's what I was saying earlier, how he twists things to be in control of the narrative, because then he tells his congregation that this guy tried to make advances towards him, and when he turned him away, then the cop got angry and arrested him. So seems legit. Apparently the law enforcement were running a bunch of undercover investigations at the time in the bathhouses because the indecent exposure incidences were becoming really prevalent. So it was just part of an undercover operation that they were running, and he fell right into it. JP seems to always find a way to make everything about himself, whether it's the previous sermons that I've watched or everything that he's posted online. Like, anyone can go look. It's always about him. He's extremely narcissistic, textbook narcissistic. I'm not in the position to diagnose anybody, but the man checks every box, okay? And so even, the obituary itself is not safe from that. I mentioned the obituary earlier, but I wanted to read a couple lines that were in there because they're just about him, how wonderful he is, of course. She was survived by her husband, Pastor John Paul Miller, whatever. And then it goes on to saying she was a risk taker. Again, to me, that was a red flag. Like, the stuff that he's listing in here, to me, is him kind of painting this narrative of she was unpredictable and, living on the edge and a risk taker and just did questionable activities. He's saying in here she's a great helpmate, which vomit on that part. She was of the utmost integrity and faithful and made the greatest efforts to be the best wife she could be. But then, this is great. She truly served Jesus and her husband with all of her heart. So she served her husband right up there with Jesus in the same sentence. Love that. She would praise her husband after every church service, telling him that he was the best preacher in the world, and then in parentheses, even if it wasn't true. She also told him he was the funniest preacher in the world, parentheses, even though that wasn't true either. And then it says Mica loved her family. So there's like 8, 9, 10 O's. Loved her family so much. She looked forward to every text from her father or brother. She sought every opportunity to pour into her sisters. And then it goes on to say that Mica loved her ice bath, nice car, sauna, house, etc. Which, again, really strange. Why would you mention personal possessions in an obituary like that unless it was to show, like, I gave her all of this. Like, she had a great life. I did this for her. I don't know. Super just inappropriate at the very fucking least. So the all-encompassing red flags are, he announces to his congregation the morning, like a couple hours after he finds out that Mica is dead, that just so matter-of-factly, oh, by the way, before you guys go and, have your pot roast after church, my wife is dead, and it was self-induced. That was a choice of words. And then he goes on to say the funeral is next Sunday, so in a week. So how has he planned a funeral in a couple hours time on a Saturday night? Like, how's that even possible? And how does he know it's self-induced or even self-inflicted when there's not been an official report? There's not been an autopsy, a coroner's exam. There was also rumors that he was trying to have her cremated. He was rushing to have her cremated. The family was very adamant about needing an autopsy. Again, the autopsy report came out today from the coroner saying it was apparently self-inflicted. I don't think it's over with that. Hopefully they get someone else to do another one or hire a private investigator to do their own investigation into this. He's clearly trying to I don't know if it's get rid of evidence, but get rid of evidence. He's already gotten rid of all of the physical evidence he could as far as the paper trails, right? I wouldn't put anything past him. So, and another giant red flag to me was what he said to the press after it came out about her death. So watch this clip and see what you pick up on.
Mica's friends tell me that she led women's ministry and worship right here at Solid Rock Church. While the death investigation is ongoing, her friends can't believe she's gone and they want answers. But her husband tells me she had a long struggle with mental illness.
She was probably the greatest wife anyone could ask for. She was incredibly affirming. We spent every night together for hours just talking and talking and talking.
But Miller says Mica battled mental health issues for years, even speaking openly about it to the congregation.
She had struggled with suicide before, and each time, helped her through it, took her to her doctor, and we got through it, and everything was fine. And
She even gave a few testimonies here at church. We have on video of times where she had battled suicide, but God took care of her and got her through it.
For families dealing with mental health issues, the pastor at Solid Rock Church has a message.
The second you see any type of sign, get them to a doctor. I mean, the second you see it, don't wait.
So what I got from that was someone who's practiced how to crack his voice, how to give fake emotion, how to manipulate people through perceived emotion, and him again painting the picture of her previous mental health struggles, really pushing the narrative that this was self-inflicted, that she was gonna do this anyway, and that he did everything in his power to prevent it, and God saved her many times, but I guess God didn't save her this time. I don't know. Oh, and the part that he said there's even videos of her in church speaking to this. It's almost like he's been building this trail of defense leading up to it. I think if someone Mica, I don't think it was him, because he's too narcissistic. I also thought it was really fucking interesting that he was with this very specific person when he got the call about Mica. So it was like he had an alibi ready to go, like an undisputed alibi, because she was found, again, an hour away across state lines. So he has his alibi. It just feels premeditated. Like I don't know how else to see that. But there's also been a lot of rumors about how his family has deep connections with that county across the state line. So not the county that they live in, but the county she was found in. Again, why would she be there? Like, her family says she has no reason to be there. And so it's just really suspicious. So if it's a good old boy system and he has ties to law enforcement there, it makes sense that she would be found there and not in a different county where they might actually do their due diligence. Again, speculating, circumstantial, but the circumstances are not looking too good in JP's favor. It just feels very pre-planned, like rehearsed, no emotion. And yeah, that in that interview with the news station is just super, super suspicious to me. It's just, I can't help but keep saying Chris Watts, because that's what it feels like to me. It feels like a repeat of a Scott Peterson or a Chris Watts or a Chad Daybell situation where there's a mistress on the side and it's kind of this get rid of the spouses so we can be together. I don't know, maybe I'm reaching on this, but I just, even though they announced today that it's supposedly self-inflicted, I just don't think that this is over. Another really sad thing about all of this is how women, especially in a religious setting, are not free. They don't feel free to leave in these abusive situations for a multitude of reasons, especially as a pastor's wife. The pressures, the image, the picture that he's painted, the villain he's made her out to be, how mental health is mocked or seen as, something's wrong with you and you need to be closer to God. That's why you're experiencing these mental health things. Or divorce not being an option because God says you're not to be divorced. Mica said that in her own words, but she brings up a brilliant point, which is, what would God say about abuse? I don't personally resonate with the part she's talking about being the bride of Christ. I don't enjoy that part, but I see what she's saying because of her own set of beliefs. I think it was a confession of her own abuse that she was enduring, even if she didn't feel like she could outright say that for obvious reasons. Especially, I know, going through a divorce, there's only so much you can say. You don't want things to be used against you in that way or be twisted in any way, so it makes sense. And of course, with these types of religious marriages that come with abuse, it's really often, if not always, put back on the woman for it being her fault for him slipping up or, cheating on her or being perverted and gross and just all of these things. It's always the woman's fault for not meeting her husband's needs in some way. So I can only imagine the amount of turmoil she was experiencing, like because of her spiritual beliefs, but not being able to stay in such a violent, harmful environment for her own well-being. She even said that, she was sleeping on her friend's couch for a while because she was afraid JP would find her, and JP did find her. He hired a private investigator to follow her and find her. She wasn't safe, and she knew she wasn't safe, and she was excited to leave this relationship and be able to breathe again for the first time in who knows how long, probably since she was 14, I don't know. Even if it did end up being Mica who pulled the trigger that night, how did she get to that point? If you look at the history, if you look at the pattern of abuse, the years and years and years of the grooming, the sexual abuse, and that's just what we know. We only know a little bit about what she endured. Everyone has a breaking point. I don't know if that was hers. I think a lot of us would have reached our breaking point before then even. So absolutely zero victim blaming here. Mica put up with so much more than anyone should ever put up with. Even the amount of gaslighting and victim blaming that's happened since she's passed away is absolutely disgusting. These people should be ashamed for continuing to do this even after her death. It's absolutely despicable. And I hope he receives some sort of repercussion for his actions, whether or not it's a homicide charge. I think there's a lot that he did that requires consequences, and he should be held accountable for the things that he's done and continues to do, and the things that we don't know about the leadership within that church, his family. It's just absolutely disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And people like this, why are they continuing to get away with this? This is not new. I've been talking about this stuff for a long time. This is a really tragic outcome, but this happens all the time. All the time. Women can't leave. Women are abused. Women are silenced. Women are gaslit. We're made to think that we're crazy, and women stay trapped in these relationships for so many reasons. And still we have the nerve to ask women, well, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just get out? Instead of asking the man, why did you do this? Why did you abuse her like this? Like, why are we holding victims accountable for the perpetrator's abuse instead of holding the perpetrators accountable for their own abuse? A lot of women don't leave because they fear for their safety, and rightfully so. There's a lot of women who can't leave for fear of their safety. So it's makes more sense to stay and stay alive and continue dealing with that than it does to leave and end up like Mica. If you have any information about this case, whether it's Mica, the church, or you have your own story, or you know someone who was affected by this church in any way from any man or person within this church, I would highly suggest going to the authorities if it's safe to do so and you feel comfortable doing so. I just don't think that this case is over. It's not over. I feel that in my gut, and I feel like something bigger is at play here, and time will tell. I hope there is justice for Mica. I hope there's justice for so many women out here who have ended up with the same tragic fate. The rest of us are responsible for doing something, for saying something, for sharing these stories. And I think it's time we all collectively humanize the pastors and the men in these leadership positions. It doesn't matter if it's a local church or a mega church, an old man or a young man. We cannot keep putting these people on a pedestal because that's how they get away with all of this shit. It is very culty. It is very charismatic leader, controls the narrative and tells people what they can and can't do, and people are punished if they leave or they speak out. All of that is evident here. This is a cult too. This isn't just a church. If you look at the BITE model, Dr. Stephen Hassan's BITE model, this checks all the boxes of a high control, high demand cult institution. And then of course, that transfers into the relationship with Mica, as we've seen. So please look out for each other, look out for yourselves, see something, say something, and live, laugh, leave a cult. I interview other cult survivors, so you can check out my Culture Shock playlist to watch some of those. And you can check out this other video I did with my friend Jess, where we talk more about Mica Miller and other people in positions of power.